Hey everybody, this is Carol Lee. Welcome. Hopefully everybody can see me. Give me a thumbs up. Let me know y'all can see me and can hear me okay. I've got Vanessa Hillbilly. Can you hear me? All right. Misty, Mrs. Wayne, thanks so much for joining. And also, let's see, I know I've got Killian and his family out there. Thank you so very much. I'm sure I've got, it's hard to see who I've got here. It kind of moves pretty quick. Woohoo! There's Ron. Hey. All right. Thank you guys. I appreciate everybody's patience with me while I floundered my way through this. Couldn't have gotten this far without American Hillbilly. You're awesome. Thank you very much. Um, let's go ahead. We've already kind of got a little late start, so let's go ahead. We'll get this show moving here. And be sure also, share this, let other people know that we are now live. I am so excited. So I want to take a quick minute to again thank everybody for staying with me this far and to welcome each and every one of you. Thank you again. And then I want to introduce you to my very first guest. He is a veteran named Phil LaPrad. So let's load up the comments and get him welcomed properly. Phil, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. So I want to begin by saying thank you very, very much for your service. I know, obviously, Vietnam veterans, they didn't get very many accolades or thank yous. So again, welcome home. That's the first thing. I know you and I had a conversation yesterday during Vet Fest, which for those of you who haven't gone, it's a great thing to go and experience some wonderful, wonderful people who have sacrificed quite a bit. Um, so, so I'm really excited to have you as my first guest, my first interview. So, are you ready to get started?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, the first question that I have for you is, when did you serve, and what branch of the military did you serve?
I was in the Air Force from 69 to 73.
69 to 73.
Yes, ma'am.
And were you drafted or did you volunteer during the time of the Vietnam War?
Uh, I was, I would have been drafted, but I volunteered.
You volunteered. Oh, that's really wonderful. Um, so, um, what can you tell me about your most memorable or significant experiences during your time in the Air Force?
Um, we, uh, I worked on communications equipment all over Asia, and the interacting with people from different countries. Uh, it it was a special experience for me. I I really enjoyed uh, being able to travel and see places that I had never seen before.
So, what kind of places were you able to visit?
I was in most. I was based in Japan, but most of my time was spent in Korea and the Philippines. Different parts. We were in different places in Japan, but we were also in several places in Korea and in the Philippines, uh, both installing equipment, overhauling and removing equipment, communications type equipment.
Okay. So that was your primary role. Um, how did you train for that? How do you think, I guess actually,
Well,
let me back. So I have a question. So, um, Boot camp versus basic training. Was it boot camp or was it basic training for you?
Oh, okay. It's basic training in the Air Force was about 6 weeks, and uh, and then anyone who had a technical field that required further training went to the base where that school was, and in my case, it was about 6 months in uh, northern Texas,
Oh,
Wichita.
wow. Okay. That's a long time, 6 months.
Yes,
And that was that just because of the specialty that you were doing?
yes, yes, yes.
Oh,
Some of the specialties, they're really unique, uh, special careers were quite a few months more than that. Some of them were almost a year.
wow. Wow. That's that's a long time. So, what kind of challenges did you face during your service? How were you able to overcome those too?
Uh, well, I guess that uh, since we did a lot of airplane travel, it just being able to um, coordinate our travels and make sure that we had all the proper tools and parts that we needed because we would go to some isolated bases and areas where you had to be prepared with what you needed because you didn't go to the local hardware store to get it.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose that's very true. Um, so what kind of interesting or unique stories during your deployments can you talk about?
Well, uh, we were assigned to several different jobs over the years, and one of the jobs that was so unique was we were asked to install a communications center for the Korean Air Force, uh,
Oh, wow.
and so we were we were based in the local economy uh, under the U.S. aid program, and so that even though we were putting in the same kind of equipment that we would use, uh, it was I guess an agreement between the U.S. government and the Air Force to provide that service. So
Hmm.
that was about 4 months total.
Okay. And so do you have any other stories that you know, funny stories, anything that really stands out for you?
Uh, well, I'm sure there's plenty of funny ones, but um we had assignments in some cases that it was isolated and it might be it's in Korea, for example. I spent a couple of Christmases at least there, and the winter time was a little tough. We had occasions. It was pretty cold in the areas where we were in, and sometimes the heat would quit working, and it was a little tough to handle. But for what compared to the guys on the front lines, the uh, the army troops, that we still had it a lot better. It was more of uh, it was an inconvenience for us, and it was the the only real trauma for an 18-year-old or 20-year-old to be put halfway around the world and have to spend holidays so in uh, away from family and friends, and of course in the 60s and 70s uh, there were no communications uh, such as cell phones, so we were we were kind of left on our own as far as communications from home. That was a little tough, but
Yeah.
we uh, we had assignments that uh, took us to places where there weren't any military housing and we ended up we put in equipment in the Philippines at a small station that took us about 3 months, and we had to spend most of that time in a hotel on the beach because that's all there was. So that it was kind of it was we
That actually, I mean, a hotel on a beach
it was
sounds really
it was
nice, but
beautiful, beautiful, pristine white beaches, and some of the areas we went, the beaches were almost unpopulated, and we could get out, get up early in the morning, get out and meet the shrimp boats and the shrimp fishermen and buy some fresh tuna and lobster from the fishermen. And that was it was a unique experience. The
a lot of
only
fresh food.
Yeah, a lot of fresh seafood, and we had opportunities to go out and go skin diving, and there's a lot of areas over there that are just like they are in the Bahamas, where the coral reefs are just a few feet under the water, and so you don't need scuba gear to do a lot of exploring, and that was that was fun to do when we had time. It it was only a tough time because they hadn't yet declared martial law, and uh, the Philippines wasn't the safest place to wander around.
Oh, well, yeah, I suppose. I suppose. So those, gosh, I mean, I just can't imagine being able to have that fresh seafood for one. But the population, you wouldn't have had as as many people either.
Oh yeah, they're well, the average person in the Philippines is uh, can't afford much of anything in the way of seafood. There were a lot of people that would live on a very small subsistence, and so we really felt rather spoiled. We were able um, to eat better there than we could at home, simply because it was uh, things were very affordable, at least for us.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So they provided you, of course, with, so much per day, like a per diem to eat,
yeah,
or how did that work for you?
yeah, yeah, everyone in the military that goes on a TDY gets assigned a per diem rate based on uh, the cost of living, I guess, in that area, and so it was always more than sufficient to be able to live off of the local economy.
Nice. Very nice. So other than, I know as a mom how difficult it is not to be able to talk to your kids when they're in the military, when they're deployed, things of that nature. You can't just call them up all the time on the phone. And obviously, that's got to have been very difficult for your family. And then for you not to be able to have that instant access like we have today with our cell phones.
Yeah.
How was that? How did you deal with that?
Well, the only experience I can remember in getting communications from home was on emergencies. Uh, well, I had gotten a call on emergencies. Shortwave radio operators would patch each other together to get a call through from the states if it was really important, and that's about the only communications that I remember ever getting. And that would take a real emergency.
Right. So letters and things from home, how did those ever catch up to you?
Oh, those came those came pretty well. I can't remember that it was a long delay. Uh, that type of correspondence was relatively easy.
That's good. That's good because I know nowadays, different branches, of course, I can't speak to, but one specific branch, sometimes things don't get there in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
And by that time, they've already been deployed somewhere, and then the package is kind of lost.
Oh, yeah, in a combat situation or a war zone, uh, it's a lot more difficult. I can see.
Yeah. And did you have a bunch of friends, any friends that had been actually there in Vietnam at the time?
Well, some of our members were sent to Vietnam, and they it was rather common back then to give you a permanent duty assignment, and then uh, after a few months, I think they had to wait 6 months, and then they could transfer you to another location if they needed you more. And there were several people in the field I was in that were reassigned to Vietnam, and even still, our job, in like most jobs in Vietnam, our job was just an essential service and not really uh, not really in the field. It was just them, and I've kept in touch with some of them, and for them it was just a stressful place to be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so have you guys ever, the ones that you have kept in touch with, have you ever been able to get together and meet with them face
Yeah.
to face?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've for the most part, the few that I've stayed in touch with, uh, the ones that didn't stay in the Air Force, kind of wish they had.
Really?
They all kind of made the same comment that uh, something about working in close quarters with each other and having to depend on each other. And it's even more so in a combat organization. It's you 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 bunk with the same people and share meals and experiences, and it's a camaraderie that you don't get in a corporation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. You find a lot of, well, common ground, obviously, that you have um, to share and experience. So, and a lot of that kind of brings you closer together instead of, competition in a corporate world.
Sure. And there's a lot of areas that we were in that well, like Vietnam, where uh, even the married guys, and the same thing's true now. There's a lot of places where you can't take your family, so you spend a lot more time with the guys that you're working with than you would have been able to with your family, and so you get to know each other really well.
You do. You become family.
Mhm.
So, how did your experience, we talked about your family and in a small sense, but how did your experience in the Air Force impact your personal and professional life in with your perspective on the world?
Um, well, I guess there's so many aspects to that. It it really um, I had already been in a lot of places myself, so it wasn't just being in different places, but it gave all of us more of an open mind towards other cultures and other people, um, because we were able to see, right up close, and uh, the uh, the different countries that we were in overseas. It it really told us a lot about uh, uh, the differences and the freedoms that we had that they don't have in other countries. There were back in the 60s and 70s, the vast majority of the guys that I remember uh, that were affected by the draft had never really left their hometown. And
Yeah.
so it was a major culture shock for most of them. And for most of us, it really gave us more of a sense of um, oh, tolerance for other cultures and the ability to see things that we would normally see. You know, with the ability to see uh, how things were that we wouldn't have been able to see if we'd stayed in one place. And I think it gave me a lot of tools uh, that I still use today, and I'm using. I tell people all the time I'm using a lot of the skills that I learned in the Air Force when you're when we were traveling around and having to make things work on our own. It's uh, and you get a lot of that in the military, and it taught us enough about being able to be uh, self-sufficient uh, and it taught us a lot about uh, uh, never saying uh, impossible or never saying it that couldn't be done. We in that kind of environment, you find out there's a lot of ways to get things done. Uh, so it's uh, you don't just say it's impossible and give up, but it taught us a lot of that.
A lot of ingenuity for sure. So, of the places that you visited that you were deployed to, which one would you want to go back to if you had the opportunity today?
um, Gee, I don't know. Uh, I'm comfortable just about anywhere, but I guess uh, if I were to go anywhere, I would probably go back to Japan.
Japan? Yeah,
Yeah.
I've never been. My oldest son, who is a Marine, has been deployed there a couple of times,
Mhm.
and it just seems beautiful. I do know though that they seem to get some pretty big earthquakes there.
Um, yes, they do, but then so does California.
Yeah. Well, that's California.
Uh, they actually uh, what they do get it generally it doesn't affect the whole country, and it's like anything here. Uh, the earthquakes are uh, affecting one area of Japan, and, uh,
Yeah.
and of course the news gets to everybody, but it's not a constant fear like you would imagine. It's just something uh, that they live with.
Right, right. So so during your training, kind of going back just a little bit, so you were trained, I presume, in marksmanship and hand to hand, all of that, even though you were in um, communications, or
No,
no, not at
no.
all.
The Air Force handled their basic training quite a bit different than the other services, um, and they the only people that handled the rifle. We were all given a chance uh, to spend one day at to practice marksmanship, and
Wow.
but that was it. And the only the technicians that were in the Air Force that didn't have a job requiring them to carry a weapon, uh, they just simply weren't trained on a weapon, and so we were allowed to do one day of marksmanship, but the majority of the uh, training and basic training for the Air Force was classroom training. It was we didn't. I don't recall any marches or anything more strenuous than general. They did have a general program of calisthenics and running around a track and uh, staying in shape, but they didn't get they didn't have to carry a weapon, and they the they I tell people it's uh, sometimes I just tell them just to rub it in, but the heaviest thing that we had to carry in basic training was a canteen.
Uh, that, yeah, I would actually rub that in their face too.
Uh, it was really focused, and of course that's what you hear from everywhere. They really focused heavily on education, and and
Which makes sense.
and there are some jobs in the Air Force, the military police, and uh, uh, there are some that are trained in combat, and those are special jobs and special careers, and a very small percentage.
So even still today, do you believe that to be the case?
Oh yes, I'm sure it is.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that is one of the branches of military that I'm not very familiar with is the Air Force. So this is all good information for me. So, so did you receive then any awards or recognition for your time in the service?
Um, I think uh, the only one that I can remember was we had a special commendation when we put the equipment in for the Korean Air Force. We had to work 48 hours straight to get the communications put online, and we were awarded I think a certificate and a few days off uh, as thanks for having done that. Other than that, I don't really recall anything more than, they give a service medal uh, for different locations. Like if you were in Vietnam, you would get a Vietnam Service Medal, and if you spent a year in Korea, you would get a Korean Service Medal. And
So Vanessa says that the Vet Corp and the
it takes.
are the tiniest, and the vet techs are the tiniest career field in the United States Air Force and Department of Defense.
Mhm.
So she says she. I'm assuming Vanessa, you're saying you're retired, permanent disability retired as of what, February of 1996? I think that's probably what she's saying there. She said had flown out to most every remote station in the Arctic back then. She said
Mm,
that was pretty fun.
yeah, uh, there are some areas that you can get assigned to that are resources are limited.
Yeah. So as far as resources go, what branch of the military, in your opinion, receives the most government funds or most funds in general for equipment?
Mm, I wouldn't know how to tell you. Um, I would have to guess the Army.
You think the Army? I don't know. I mean, I've heard different things, but of course, you know how it is between military branches. So it's a little bantering back and forth, but yeah, I don't have a specific idea, so it's just kind of a question in general.
Sure.
So, so the medal then that you received, or the um, recognition that you received, was for your time, the 48 hours that it took to get that.
Yeah, that was.
That's nice.
Yeah, and I think I've got a Korean Service Medal for being in spending over a year in Korea, um and that's uh, I don't recall anything else as far as awards. Uh, I'm sure there are some, but they're more. There's plenty of uh, ribbons that you get just for being in the uh, certain areas, combat areas, or uh, uh, different countries, different um, zones, I guess. And
Yeah.
I was only being in there for 4 years. I really wasn't paying much attention to all of that.
That's fair though. I mean, but still, 4 years is a long time. And the fact that you volunteered to do that in a time where, they were drafting people because they couldn't get enough volunteers is huge.
Sure.
Uh,
Uh, my dad was a West Point graduate, and he was an Army retiree uh, in '69, and he I just don't remember that he suggested that I go either way at the time. It had gotten so Vietnam had gotten so political and so uh, it had gotten so rough. I don't think he uh, was that excited that I joined the Air Force rather than the Army. I don't think you know, I don't think he really thought much of it because things had gotten so bad.
so in other words, every branch was needed.
Oh yeah,
People were needed, and
yeah.
and
I think he was happy to see me serve, and that was plenty.
yeah, that's huge. That's amazing. That you did it and that you were, able to do it and see some beautiful places. Just because you didn't see combat doesn't make you any less of a veteran. So thank you for that, by the way. And can you just explain for our viewers real quick um, how it is? So you're a Vietnam veteran and how you end up with that title where you didn't
Okay.
see combat, and explain that to them. I know you explained it to Jason and I when we saw you yesterday.
Oh, um, uh, the Vietnam Veterans of America was formed when they were formed as a group. They they made the inclusion that covers all veterans that were serving during the years of the Vietnam War, and so anyone that joins and becomes a member of the Vietnam Veterans is that wasn't based in Vietnam, then their uh, title is a Vietnam era veteran, and it's a distinction that not everybody understands the distinction. But in my case, I'm a Vietnam era veteran, uh,
Okay.
but I'm a member of the Vietnam veterans because they are inclusive.
Wonderful. And that to me clears up a lot more in my mind. Um, because I guess I just assumed everybody was grouped, even if you served during that time, you were still grouped as just a Vietnam veteran. So it's a Vietnam era veteran.
Right, right.
Okay. Well, that helps. So thanks for that information.
Yeah, the distinction makes. Uh, I can tell you, uh, the I've been welcomed in my group, and the distinction um is not um it's not noticed as much by uh, Vietnam veterans that went to Vietnam. They really don't, uh, for the most part, they really don't consider themselves uh, a cast of exclusive members. They're very welcoming to anyone that was in the service, and they all pretty much say the same thing. If you didn't go to Vietnam, just be thankful that you weren't, that you didn't. That they don't they don't they don't see that as their exclusive right. You know, they know it was a tough choice to make.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm sure they realize too, for the administrative side of things, communications in, in what you did, that was very integral for them to
Yeah,
make sure that, communications were up and running, whether it was specifically there in Vietnam or other areas that, other countries where you were at, that communication would need to flow through.
sure.
So,
We had members that came out of my school uh, that were assigned to. Uh, I know one member was assigned to 2 years in Turkey, uh, and another member spent had a 3-year assignment in Hawaii. So they kind of went everywhere. Some of them were based in an island in the Pacific. Uh, Thule, Greenland wasn't a very popular place to go. Um, there there were some places that were that nobody volunteered for, but uh, there there were some really nice, unusual locations, and it's just part of uh, it's just part of the service.
yeah. So, going back to when you were there for 4 years, tell us about how you managed your transition from military life to civilian life. How difficult was that?
Mm, uh, I went almost immediately into college when I got out of the service. That was that was a big goal for me, and I had five brothers and sisters, um, and I hadn't seen them for uh, over 3 years uh, because I hadn't come home on vacation or between tours, and so I hadn't seen them for quite a while, and I uh, had hoped to catch up, um, and I discovered that they they kind of avoided me, and I didn't quite understand why, and uh, they we'd grown quite a bit apart, I guess, and I didn't find out until maybe 20 years later. One of my sisters uh, admitted that they were afraid to be around me because we were all baby killers,
Ah,
and this is my brothers and sisters.
right. So that was I'm sure that was really heartbreaking to hear.
Oh yeah, uh, they didn't say why, but it just uh, I just kind of felt left out when I came back. They didn't really tell me why.
And how many siblings do you have?
I had five.
5? Yeah.
So for me it wasn't the return wasn't that traumatic like it was for a lot of the guys, um, and I didn't realize it, until years later. I've heard stories about how badly some of the troops were treated when they came back from Vietnam, uh, and it was pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, the stories, I've heard that, being spit on and kicked and things thrown at, and I can't even imagine,
Yeah,
doing what you did, serving your country, making things better in other countries to ensure our safety here and that things don't spread.
yeah,
And to have that,
yeah. The media and the media and the country had done just uh, a terrible job of portraying the troops in Vietnam, um, and and I tell people, for those guys it was really it's still rough on some of those guys, but the what I tell people is I think is a very positive um, change in this country when kids. This didn't happen 40 years ago, but when kids come up to you and somewhere and thank you for your service, and uh, it tells me that we're the public is on a much better track. It's things are much more positive now
Y-
in
Yeah,
the support of the veterans.
yeah, yeah. And I think that, that obviously is a good thing that, that they're understanding you didn't necessarily have a choice to go and be where you were.
Yeah.
And volunteer or not, a lot of times too, you would volunteer for something, but you wouldn't get what you wanted, what you went in there for necessarily either. You went wherever there was a need.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that, just the history of that and hearing about Vietnam, I think, that's important for future generations. I mean, that personally, that's my opinion. To ensure we don't ever get ourselves into something like that again. But um, which that kind of leads me into my next question for you is, how has your perception on war and conflict evolved over the years since your service?
Uh, well, I'm definitely against war, and I'm definitely for avoiding conflict at all costs. I think most of the comments that I heard from veterans my age uh, when the issue of Iraq came up uh, was, we don't need another Vietnam, and let's pray that this doesn't happen. And of course, as we all know, it did happen. We and
Yep.
we but I would have to say the majority of the veterans that I heard from uh, uh, would were not really ready to bring the country back into war. I think they all saw the potential problems, and because they knew from their experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. War is not an easy thing. I mean, it's, a lot of taking of lives and on both sides. And, that is just, I don't know, a lot of times people forget how to actually communicate with one another.
Oh yeah, yeah. I learned a lot about communications in the service.
Yeah, you did. You really did. So, um, as far as misconceptions and stereotypes about Vietnam veterans or Vietnam era veterans, I know we kind of briefly talked about that. Is there anything more you want to address or clarify about?
Well, they're uh, of course, everyone I'm sure, has heard by now the statistics that there's 22 suicides a day from, uh, and I think the number has gone down somewhat. Um, but it's veterans are uh, almost 20 veterans a day are committing suicide still, and and my understanding, uh, I think a misconception that a lot of people in this country have even still is that veterans are high strung, and that combat veterans are not safe to be around, and the reality is that uh, I serve a lot of guys that are in that kind of shape, and that the reality is that when they deal with a PTSD and mental struggles and a lot of issues from their service, uh, they tend the only people they tend to harm are themselves. They they It's pretty rare occasion that a veteran uh, goes out of his way to hurt somebody else. They end up, when they get into that kind of shape, they ended up uh, more likely than not taking it out on themselves.
Yeah. And what do you think? This is just a thought that I had as far as perceptions go for the public. I think that a lot of people assume that because you're a veteran, that you've got hardened emotions, that kind of thing. But they forget that first and foremost are human and you have feelings.
Yeah.
And I think that that in and of itself, that perception that people have is, veterans are very hard and very stoic and can't show emotion. I think is not accurate.
No, no, that's true. They're they're their emotions are just as strong as everyone else, and they they tend to they tend to keep their service history to themselves. They don't they don't necessarily try to keep to themselves as much as they don't share a lot of their experiences with their family and friends. And and I had that situation with my dad, um, and I think from what I've learned over the years, I've worked with World War II vets, and in the things that I do in providing service, and younger vets, and it's just human nature. They they don't always go. They don't often uh, share their work experience with their family. It's just human nature. They're we're all like that.
Do you think that if they shared more with the people around them that care for them, that maybe we could see that suicide rate go down?
Oh, I'm sure we could. Yeah, I'm sure. And I've talked to so many family members, uh, and quite often veterans that have passed away, and they that's one of their biggest regrets, that they didn't share, and they couldn't get them to open up, and they usually they want to know, they want to share, and they in many cases you get a veteran that's really struggling with PTSD, and he's got I say he, or they have a spouse or a family around them. um, they want to share as much as they can, and uh, so it's probably the hardest obstacle to overcome is communications.
Yeah. And I think that that would be just by having them communicate.
Hmm.
Again, I think the same holds true as far as misperceptions is when we think because you're military, veteran or otherwise, that you're a hardened individual and you don't have feelings. But then, it's like same senses, veterans as well as military personnel who still are active duty need to, with those that, love and support them, need to be able to show that those feelings and know that their feelings should be trusted with those people that care and love them.
Yeah, it's it's a hard line. Uh, it's a hard line to cross.
It is. And I think having this show with the goal of this channel is really to show other veterans that they're not alone in having feelings and in the struggles to be able to share. Maybe they don't feel like they have something in common. Maybe they feel like they're going to be judged. And you know, the fact is sometimes in war things happen. It's war.
And they carry that load. They carry that to their grave. And I'll just share with you one veteran that we helped out. We quite often when I get to an older vet, like a World War II vet, it's a daughter that's asked me to help him out. It's usually not the vet that asks for help. It's usually a daughter or a spouse. And we went to the Tennessee Veterans Home uh, a few years ago to help out a World War II veteran that he was 96 when we came in to help with his wheelchair. And once he was hard to talk to until he realized that we were veterans, and he started to open up, and he proceeded at 96. He told us a brief story about he was in a battalion of 50 members that had been captured by the Germans,
Oh,
and
wow.
he was the only person that came out alive. And
Oh my gosh.
when he finished, and I don't know what triggered him to tell us, but when he finished telling us, the tears were coming down. And here he is. He's 96 years old, and since then I've seen this many times over, and the guilt uh, was just as heavy at 96 as it was at 26. And he was still living with all that guilt that he made it, and his buddies didn't. So they carry they carry these kind of loads, that's mental anguish there to the grave.
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Survivor's guilt is real.
and and I think uh, the only thing that helps to ease that is just more communications, and um, being able to talk to somebody and share their experience. That
Yeah.
you can't cure them of it, but you can help help them to live without all that load dragging them down.
Yeah. This is the more you talk about it, I think, again, my personal opinion, the more you talk about it and you're able to get it out from here and expel that out, you're able then to handle it better. It doesn't go away. You never forget, but it doesn't weigh on your shoulders as much. And it doesn't change, your mental process, how you think of the world around you and yourself internally. It helps to improve, your outlook on life.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, um, as far as the younger generations go, what kind of messages or insights would you have for them, as far as the Vietnam War and the experience of you veterans?
Um, you mean as far as advice, or
Yeah.
um, well, I quite often tell younger people after 20 some odd years of working in the corporate world, uh, that at that point I realized that the what I thought was problems with the military and the government uh, uh, were not any better, and and I found I try to tell young people that Air Force job was one of the best I've had. It was um, it was at least as professional and more professional than uh, some of the Fortune 500s that I've been with. They you're working in close quarters with people, and you depend on each other, and it and the military tends to give you uh, as much responsibility as you want to take, and in the corporate world that doesn't happen. Not that doesn't always happen. They the military will let you can tackle jobs and technical things with the military that uh, you know you can work on $1 billion airplanes, and if you're in the corporate world, you might have to have 30 years of experience before they let you touch one.
Right.
Uh, and there,
And 12 degrees.
yeah, and that and I found waste and the politics and the things that were wasted, and I found that to be worse in the corporate world than it was in the military. I,
Yeah.
I, I thought certainly once I got out and everything would have to be justified, and uh, and it's not necessarily true. There's I mean, there's good and bad everywhere, but I I try to tell young people, yeah, you can find a really good career in the military, and it's uh, a lot more rewarding um, than most regular jobs. That's what I think. You can go in and get technical. Uh, you can get into a technical training field that you can't even get into in civilian life. You know, there's a lot of opportunities, and some of those jobs will take you all over the world to places that you couldn't normally afford to go to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really true. So I know because we had the conversation yesterday. Um, but if you could tell those listening, have you been involved in any veteran support or advocacy groups since returning from deployment from service? And what are those groups?
Okay. Well, of course, I joined the Vietnam Veterans, um, and when I joined, they actually got my name from someone, and I joined to help them initiate a mission here in Rutherford County that was focused on providing mobility equipment to veterans with disabilities. And since then, I've found other veterans groups that I've helped out with that were um, involved in. Uh, well, one of the big things that I've gotten involved with as a volunteer is the groups that do songwriting for vets with PTSD, and that's a program that's really dear to my heart, and I really have tried as much as possible to steer uh, veterans in that direction, and especially younger veterans. I've found that uh, when I first started, uh, 8 or 9 years ago with the Vietnam vets, I wasn't in the habit of wearing a cap, but I found that uh, I've gotten into a habit of wearing my cap everywhere I go because sometimes uh, the person that I'm seeing uh, won't tell me they're a vet, but when they see the cap, it strikes up a conversation. And
Yep.
I've had the younger vets from Iraq and Afghanistan uh, that have gone through some really horrific experiences and been disabled, and to look at them, you would think it was they were just out of high school, and so I've tried to help steering a lot of especially younger veterans towards the songwriting, and they, one of the groups, Freedom Sings USA, did a uh, I was helping them out as a volunteer, and they offered to do one for me, and uh, it was it was soul lifting. It was really, uh, and I don't deal with PTSD and uh, anything in any at any level that I would call, but it sure did, it did a lot for me, and I can tell you the guys that I've worked with that have gotten into the songwriting and worked with the songwriters, it uh, it changes their life. It really changes their spirit. And
So how does that work? Do they ask you certain questions and you just answer those, or do you tell them kind of your experiences and they go from there?
a little bit of both. They one group started this in 2015. Operation Song started this in the vet centers, and they started in Nashville simply because there were so many. I guess there are so many resources there, and some of the members were involved in the music business, and they got some really. really experienced songwriters to sit down. What they started doing, and this, I guess, 8 years ago, was they would come to the vet center, sit down in a room with the vet, whoever volunteered, anybody that volunteered, they would put them in a room, and a couple of songwriters would ask questions, and they might get them to jot down a little bit of a story, and they ask enough. These guys are like, in my opinion, they're like a master psychologist, because they take and ask the right questions, and uh, they get a feeling for what kind of music they like, and what their experiences are that they really relate to, and some of these guys, the song might end up being nothing but a song about their dog, and some of them, it's a song about their wife, or the music that they played before they went to war, or uh, it's there's a lot of war experience, that goes into the music, but uh, it's really, they just really have a way of pulling out uh, what goes great into a song, um and I know they did that experience for me, and I was just thoroughly amazed at how it seemed to be so easy for them, and since then they've branched out. The vet centers got closed in during COVID, and part of the songwriters branched off uh, to do this on Zoom, and so 3 years ago they started doing Zoom meetings for that way they didn't have to rely on going into the vet center, and so now there's other groups that have kind of cloned on, or other songwriters that have stepped up, and I think there's groups pretty much all over the country now that that are that are doing the same approach, and different fashions, and uh, so it's I try to spread the word as much as I can, just to be able to get more veterans involved, and
Yeah. I
they
think that's music in and of itself. I mean, that's something that you remember from childhood
yeah,
and things that you can hang on to in times of trouble, trouble times that you might have is, taking your mind back to a certain song or something that made you feel good. So it makes perfect sense to have that.
it strikes a chord uh, that much easier than uh, counseling therapy. I think
Yeah.
the ones that are willing to, and it's all free to the veterans. The songwriters devote all their time and money, and they've actually uh, they've actually found donors to put up all the money required for the recording sessions, and so the only thing that they ask of the vet is to sit down with them, and um, let them write a song. They,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that's amazing that they've donated that time and to be able to do that and help. And I think that's got to be a major help for people.
it's a way to reach some that you couldn't normally reach.
Right.
And
So just to kind of put something out there, and I'm sure you're aware of this. It's things that you probably have talked to or kind of been trained on, if you will, about recognizing some of the signs of suicide risk in our veterans. So if those of you who are out there in the chat at the moment and or listen to this recording later on down the road, some of those signs of suicide risk. If somebody is thinking about hurting or killing themselves, they're looking for ways to actually do that, or they're talking about death or dying or suicide. They have any kind of self destructive behavior, such as drug abuse, weapons, those kinds of things. Make sure that you let somebody know if it's not something that you feel capable of getting them, the help that they need. You can always maybe even contact the Veteran Crisis Line yourself. The number 1-800-273-8255, and you can press the one. And that is also, they do have a confidential crisis chat at the veteranscrisisline.net. You can also text to 838-255, and do the best you can to get them the help that they deserve. And at a minimum, just try and get them to talk, because sometimes that's all it takes, is for them to get that out.
Oh yeah.
So, Phil, do you have anything else you want to add? I think we're probably getting close. I think that's all the questions I have.
Oh, okay.
Does anybody out there in the chat have any questions? Anything you want to ask, Phil? Uh, so, Hillbilly Up, who graciously helped me today, says, "Great show. Thank you, Phil, for sharing, and thank you for your service." And of course, Ron Wayne, who was on their chat, said, "Thanks again for coming on the show, Phil. God bless, and thanks for your service." So you are very much appreciated in everything that you did, as far as your military career and everything you're doing to help your fellow veterans today. So much, much appreciated. I'm not seeing anything just yet, but it takes sometimes a minute or two for people to type. So we'll give them a few minutes. So do you have any closing thoughts you want to add, Phil?
Well, I guess my focus is providing anything and everything a veteran or a veteran's family would need that's got a disability, and we've been blessed with in our group. They took this on as a chapter. Uh, we've given out equipment that went to half a dozen other states and as well as Middle Tennessee, uh, and we're our hardest. Uh, I guess our biggest expense is storage because we're not reaching enough people, and we're dying to give more things away to families that need it. That that we voted to include immediate family members of veterans uh, in our scope, and it's helped us. It's helped us help a lot of spouses and children and parents. That's and we are able to do things that the VA doesn't address because we don't just help the veteran. So that's it's done a lot for me to be able to do that and give back. Um, it's been a real it keeps me on my feet. It's been a real pleasure.
Right. Absolutely.
They,
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you again for your service. Thank you very, very much. And we are going to wrap up. So I do have, for those of you watching, my next show will be next week. That'll be Sunday the 15th at 6 p.m. So I'm looking forward to having y'all join us then. Thank you very much. And Phil, if you want to hold tight, we're gonna wrap this up, and I will meet you backstage.
okay.
Thanks again, everybody, for coming.